I just got back from a walk in the rain. Um, I love to walk in the rain because the rain is cleansing, and sometimes it can bring to the surface things that we may not have even realized that we were carrying. And I didn't really have anything come up, but I did see the largest acorn I have ever seen in my entire life. Wasn't like this big. It was this big. Humongous. Never seen an acorn so large in my life. And there was a very large crack in it. Not a crack even. It was like part of the shell was missing. And so you could see the inside. And I felt there's something there. There's a reason why, with no oak trees around, I found this giant acorn on a sidewalk. And I'm contemplating it as I walk along. Because, of course, if you know me, you know that if something catches my attention, there's a reason for it. And I'm walking along thinking about the acorn. And the acorn itself holds all of the DNA that little tiny seed will ever need in order to become the oak tree. If this acorn is literally the size of my palm, how much data or DNA is in this acorn? And I think that this is a message that as you start to continue to bloom and blossom, or even myself, this is a message that I could be picking up for myself too. The more that this seed continues to crack open, the more you're able to understand that which is inside, right? And it's way bigger than you actually thought it was. That kind of makes a lot of sense, right? I've been talking about this, the more that you get into the light, the more your eyes start to adjust, right? You were in a cave and you just walked outside in broad daylight. And you weren't smart enough to bring an eye patch so you could go, oh, I can see. I'm just kidding. A little bit of useless knowledge that I know. Pirates wear eye patches in order to be able to go below the deck and just switch it and already have an eye that was adjusted to the dark. Yes. They didn't actually have missing eyeballs. Well, some of them did, but that was actually the useful reason for the eye patch. Sorry, side rant, always. The point is that I feel like the more that we adjust to being aware, the more aware we become. And the more aware we become, the more we realize the bigger picture. And I think that's where the major message is here, is that, just because you can't see inside of the acorn doesn't mean there isn't a lot of vital information in there. And as you continue to crack yourself open and allow yourself to feel things that may feel uncomfortable because you've never allowed yourself to feel them before. You've never experienced what it's like to be outside of that shell. You've only ever experienced the data within. And now the world is opening up. And it's no longer data. Now it's experience. And experience equals wisdom. You can gather data all day long, but you can't feel data. You can read it, you can understand it, but that doesn't mean you've experienced it. So the cracking open of your outer shell is letting in a whole new bit of light, whole new perspective, a little bit of rain because it was raining today, and air. Now that the inside of you is starting to breathe, what are you starting to better understand? It's no longer a cyclone of just whirlwind thoughts. Now all of these other elements turn it into experience, and experience creates stability in the air. Because what do you hate more than anything? Well, at least me. Confusion. Why? Because there's no clarity. And if the mind has no clarity, it cannot properly think. It cannot do its job to its best ability if you've forgotten how to speak to your own air mind, your own body, your own water within you, and your own heart. The language of the heart isn't the same as the language of the mind. And if we continue to speak the language of the mind to the heart won't understand. But now that the shell has been cracked open, now the heart can understand, because the mind is no longer a whirlwind of just data. Now it's putting the 2 and 2 together and seeing that 2 and 2 together is still 2, just in a different form, right? 2 and 2. It's still 4. You can break it down any way you want to. Dude, numbers are so freaking cool. I love numbers. Ooh. But once you start to realize that data and wisdom are two totally different things, you stop collecting the data and start experiencing that data. And I'll be honest, this is what I've been doing since I cracked open my own shell. This has been me unraveling all of the data that I've gathered over the years inside of my acorn shell. Every little bit of data that I even unconsciously absorbed. Think about it. Like, a certain smell can bring back a memory, right? So if you can connect your smelling to your brain, you can connect all of your senses to your brain, right? And when we touch certain things or see certain colors, they trigger reactions within the brain. And the more you learn to tune into those things that trigger reactions in the brain, the more capable you are of understanding the previously collected data and the feelings that it has evoked. When we learn that feelings are actually our intuition, it changes everything. Your emotions are trigger warnings. Not necessarily warnings, but they're triggers, right? So, like, if the energy of happiness is coming from me, that's because there's something within me or around me that is triggering that emotion of happiness within me. Okay? Same thing for anger. Something enters into my field, it triggers a reaction of anger. Whoop! Now I'm going to go, oh, whoa, why am I feeling anger? This is an emotion that shows me something is wrong. The happiness I'm going to feel, and I'm going to continue to feel it. I'm going to feed that feeling of energy, that feeling and energy of happiness, right? I'm going to feed into it by going, oh, this is making me happy, 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 happy. I'm going to feed that energy. But if it's a negative emotion or a trigger emotion, I'm going to focus not necessarily on the emotion itself. I'm going to focus on what triggered that emotion. I've been talking about this for years because I've been working through trauma for years, and I can't tell you how many of my papers in college were literally written about trauma. I have been studying it since 2016 when I lost my career due to trauma. And then I watched what happened to my late husband, the horrible journey he went down because of never speaking about it, because of never expressing it, by letting it just fester within his heart. And when it festered within his heart, I watched him slip away. That was unfortunately necessary for me to do. It was absolutely necessary for me to collect that data, because as he was falling apart, so was I. And I wasn't just collecting the data from watching him, I was collecting the data from feeling it myself. So not only did I have the experience, I had the data. And that allowed me to be able to crack the code. Cryptology is amazing. Patterns are everywhere. And we have a tendency to try to find those patterns as humans for a reason. Why? Because patterns indicate cycles. We're naturally drawn to cycles because we're natural. I watched this video yesterday. I really am going to continue to watch it because it's beautiful. It's called The Secret Life of Chaos. And it was immediately, I was like, yay! Why? Because it shows the unpredictable, predictable patterns within nature. Chaos is not chaos. It is order. Divinely orchestrated chaos in order to clear a path. When we remember that chaos is the machete cutting our path through the jungle, we remember we have absolute control over chaos, because it's part of a two-part energy, right? If we have a positive and a negative and a neutral, the neutral in between is balance between chaos and order. Nature is predictably unpredictable. You can literally put a mathematical equation to it, but it's not the same. Just because the petals on that flower have the exact same number of petals doesn't mean that the exact same color will come out of every single one of those petals. Just because every single one of those flowers has the same number of petals doesn't mean every single plant is going to have the same number of flowers or even leaves. But there is a scientific equation that can tell you exactly how many branches there will be on a tree and how many branches there will be in roots and how many leaves will be on each of those branches. This is the lesson that we must understand. It is not necessarily about the data. It's linking the data to the wisdom. How does this apply in your life? How has your life been so predictably unpredictable that there's a pattern? What are the patterns? Why are there patterns? Are these patterns for your growth, or are they patterns of your self-destruction? Resets, respawns, pick it up at the last checkpoint because you kind of dropped the ball. It's okay. We dropped the ball. That's how we experience. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. That's how we evolve. If you see a static line of the exact same pattern with absolutely no growth or expansion, no change whatsoever at all, you're living a cycle repeat. However, if you can look back at your life and see this led to this choice led to this choice, which changed the trajectory, and I went up a level and I no longer chose that choice anymore because I realized that was a bad choice. It was not good for me. And I explained that in the Rise of the Archetypes video. It took me 2 cycles of a domestic violence relationship to realize that's not something I ever wanted to do again, and I never did it again. They weren't all perfect after that. There was the emotional. I went from absolutely no to the physical abuse to emotional pain and dealt with that. And then I went up to another arc and said, I'm worth more than this. And so then I evolved, right? It's not a static line of chaos. It is a static line, or it is a growth line, a non-linear, of course, because I had the opportunity to leave the gate. I chose to go back down a level and start again. Okay. That was my own choice in order to be able to experience that which I went through. And I can see exactly why I made that choice. There was 2 branches there. This branch would have led to my career trajectory continuing on the path it was. This branch led to me understanding life as a healer versus the warrior. So this path would have led to me staying in the warrior path. This choice would have led to me taking the healer path. And I wanted to be able to experience both. It was a dream when I was a child to be a psychologist, actually a psychiatrist. And then I realized I didn't want to be a psychiatrist because I actually understood the difference. And so like I said in another video, my life dream as a child was completely different as my life dream as an adult, but I got to experience both of those paths. So what others may see as cycle repeat, I see as me choosing a completely different track in order to be able to conquer both. It literally I had to take that other path in order to be able to find the structure that I required in my life, but was always seeking in outside sources, like the military. The military was the structure that I had needed in my entire life. I mean, I was raised by Marines, so I already had that structure. And then going into the adult world, I had no structure. I was chaos. When I joined the military, I learned how to build that structure within, but I didn't do that. It wasn't until I took that other track and went down the road of healer that I learned how to find that within myself. And then that's when I realized I had to find that within myself, right? So just because your life is where it is doesn't mean it was a problem. Yes, there are patterns, and if you see no growth in a certain pattern, focus on that. That's what we're doing right now. If you are repeating the same thing over and over again, since I was a child, I was always told the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, which very well may be the exact reason why every single time something ended in my life, I recalibrated because I didn't want to do it the exact same way I did it before, because that's insanity, right? Yeah. And I talk about this. When you are the phoenix, you do not rise from the ashes and build the exact same twig house that you just burned down. You realize it's not a twig house that you need. You're fire. You need something that's fire resistant. So you recalibrate, you change your trajectory. You step into a new archetype. Remember, archetypes aren't identities, they're skills. The skill set of that archetype. As we shift us, we stop limiting ourselves. And we experience life from a completely different perspective. I've been dealing with the loss of identity, right? So, and I talked about this. It was so freaking hard for me to sit there and admit to myself that I was no longer Sergeant Dash. That was me for 8 years. I got my nickname of Dash within like 6 months of being in the military. I was Dash for 8 years of my life. And then suddenly I wasn't even, that wasn't even my last name anymore. And so, like, it was completely gone. And now I was a retired disabled vet. It wasn't until the acorn shell actually cracked open that I was able to see just how much bigger the world actually is. Because all I had ever experienced was that inside of my little shell. The crack's open. There's actually a big hole in it, right? Now you're not just seeing like flashes. Now you're seeing the bigger picture. And you're like, oh, wow. Like I said, with this little teeny tiny pebble. Just stop for a second again and think of how long it took for this teeny tiny little pebble to just create that line. And then to see the acorn the size of the palm of my hand. The amount of wisdom inside of you is much more than you had actually realized. Same here. The wisdom that was inside of me, like, I lived my life without any direction. I never planned for the future. Never. Because I never knew what was going to happen. And so I never planned for the future. I never had a 5-year goal, a 10-year goal. I didn't even know what I wanted to do with my life. I never settled on anything. Because it never felt right. Nothing ever landed and said, yep, that's what you're supposed to do. Because my acorn, my shell, was so closed off. You have no freaking idea, like, how blinded I was to anything outside of my little teeny tiny environment. And my environment changed a lot. But it was always completely engrossed in that entire environment. And I've talked about this before. Like, I didn't explore anything about space. I was a huge fan of Star Trek when I was a kid, but that was as far as I went. I didn't like sci-fi. I wasn't a fan of, like, any of that stuff. And so, like, I never explored reality beyond my physical environment, which was me inside of that acorn. And then when it cracked open, man, I tell you what, the very first conversation I ever had about aliens, when I was like, wow, maybe that's true. It was in 2021. And then what happened from there? I don't know. It was just like, wow. Peekaboo. That's the shell opened up. And suddenly nothing makes sense because everything you thought made sense doesn't make sense anymore. And that's okay. Because everything you need to know is already inside of you. Just like the acorn. You will be the mighty oak. Bye, guys.